Here's Jeff Morgan.
I'm going to move the booklet here, and thank you. So my name is Jeff Morgan. I am from Dallas, Texas. I'm going to be approaching this in a little bit of a different manner. I talk about the issue of unilateral, no-fault divorce, and people, when they first started to hear me talk about it, was like, what is that? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But I'm going to also talk about unilateral, no-fault divorce and its relationship to the erosion of our religious liberties. It was Vladimir Lenin who said, destroy the family, destroy society. I think this is one area that the church needs to take a strong stand on, that we've been too silent about. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of our religious liberties already being taken away from us. So the first thing I'm going to look at, a lot of this will be a little bit Texas heavy because that's where I'm working out of. I've got a number of slides here. I can give you the outline, but I'll just go through them instead of try to work my way through it. I can take any questions afterwards if you have any. But the first thing is what is the nature of marriage? And when you look at our Texas Family Code, one of the first things they talk about is the dissolution of marriage, but they never tell you what marriage is. What is marriage? And I think this is very important, because is marriage defined by the church, by God, or by the state? Or it could be both. Like when we take the example of Christmas. Is Christmas a secular holiday? To some people, yes. Is it a religious holiday? To many people, yes. It can be a combination of the two. And I think this is very important, that we must think about the nature of marriage before we talk about the issue. Oh, I'm not moving my thing, am I? Are you doing it for me? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, is marriage religious or is it secular? And I think it's, we've got to say firsthand, it is religious in nature. We take marriage seriously. Why? Because God takes marriage seriously. Who conducted the first marriage ceremony? God himself did. And who are vows taken to? Our vows are taken to God. So next slide. Looking at the biblical perspective on marriage, I want this is a quick overview, going back to creation, going back to the chapter of Genesis, Genesis chapter 2. The Lord God said it's not good for man to be alone. So he what? He created, he fashioned a woman, and he brought them together. Then the man said, this is at last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Family was created by God. Family was created before the institution of government. Family is the first economy. It's the first school. It's the first learning laboratory. It's the place that we learn how to love each other, to forgive each other. It's the first society. We cannot forget that. Continuing on with the next slide. The biblical perspective of marriage, looking at what Jesus said. You know, Jesus performed his first wedding, his first miracle where? At the wedding of Cana of Galilee. He compared the kingdom of God to a great wedding feast. And he also taught the permanence of marriage. Going back to Genesis, he said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, as we just talked about, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. Next slide. Paul says this, that marriage is a mystery, and it portrays what? It portrays the relationship of Christ and the church. Going to Ephesians chapter 5, it says that it talks about the husband-wife relationship, and then in verse 32, the mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Marriage is a living symbol of the relationship between Christ and the church. It's interesting how we get so upset because somebody wants to take down a cross, or maybe they don't want to have a manger scene someplace. But marriage is being destroyed by the state, and we do not protest. Marriage is the symbol of the relationship between us as believers, we as believers, and the Lord Jesus Christ. Next slide. One of the last events in the Bible, in Revelation chapter 19, is the marriage supper of the Lamb. Let us rejoice and exalt and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. So my only conclusion here is this. Marriage, you must believe, you have to affirm that at least it's in part religious in nature. And there's going to be a point to this. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. But this point, it's not just that the Bible teaches that. Next slide. The Catholic and Orthodox perspective on marriage also teaches that. Teaches just what we said, that marriage is created by God. The intimate community of life and love, which constitutes the married state, has been established by the Creator and endowed by Him with its own proper laws. God Himself is the author of marriage, not the state. God Himself is the author of marriage. Next slide. Not only is marriage created by God, but it's also considered to be a sacrament. And again, this is a Catholic and Orthodox perspective. There's a little bit of difference when you talk about Protestant perspectives and so on. But what's awesome about the sacrament of marriage is that it differs from the other 6 sacraments in that it existed before the inauguration of the new covenant. The sacrament of matrimony signifies the union of Christ and the church. Marriage is a sacrament. Next slide. Marriage is also considered to be a one-flesh relationship. And this, again, looking at the teaching of the church, the Lord Himself shows that this signifies an unbreakable union of their 2 lives by recalling that the plan of the Creator had been in the beginning, so they are no longer 2, but one flesh. It's a little bit repetitive there, I understand that. Next slide. But the other thing is this, both the Catholic Church, especially the Catholic Church, and I believe the Orthodox as well, believe in the indissoluble covenant behind marriage. Marriage is not just a nice social arrangement. 2 people in Christ who get married, as the pastor said earlier, it's not 2 people, there's 3 people. There's God and there's the 2 individuals. The people that pledge their lives make their vows to God. It is an indissoluble covenant. That is the teaching of Scripture. The church sees marriage as a covenant, not just merely a contract. It elevates marriage even more than a contract. God's covenant is irrevocable because, again, that's a symbol of His love toward us. His love lasts forever, and that's what our marriage is supposed to signify. Next slide. So my only conclusion is this: marriage has a religious component. And this is very, very important, especially in the state of Texas. We take marriage seriously because God takes marriage seriously. Next slide. God has an opinion about divorce, too. He hates divorce. She is your companion and your wife by covenant. Did not God make her? Both flesh and spirit are His. And what does God desire? Godly offspring. So look to yourselves and do not let anyone be faithless of the wife of his youth. For I hate, I detest, I abhor, I can't stand. It nauseates me. Divorce. Says the Lord, the God of Israel, and covering one's garment with violence. Divorce is actually pictured as your garments being stained with blood, the blood of your spouse. You're getting divorced, you're stabbing your spouse, her blood or his blood is spurting upon you. Oh, we're going to have a nice and happy divorce. That's not God's perspective. Next slide. So I want to go to the state's general purpose for marriage, and basically when you look at the state, because the state does have a legitimate interest in marriage. Even though God created marriage, God is the author of marriage, the state also says that marriage is to attach mothers and fathers to their children. Because everybody knows children need both parents. Read the Old Testament. And God has a very special place in His heart for the widows and the orphans. Children need both parents. And the state realized that. Our state used to be a little bit more focused from a godly perspective on this issue. Marriage attaches mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. That is the essential public purpose of marriage. Because without it, we wouldn't need marriage as a social institution at all. Look at the animal world. They mate and then they go on. They may come back depending upon the animal that you're looking at. But human beings are different. Human beings are created by 2 people, little children, and they should be reared by 2 people, informed by 2 children. Next slide. And the state actually recognizes that. So marriage is important enough that it's actually mentioned in the Bill of Rights in Texas. So first off, the Bill of Rights, it talks about certain things that are accepted from the powers of government and violate. But then it talks in Article 1, Section 32, that marriage in this state shall consist only of the union of one man and one woman. And we agree with that. But what we forget is that, we sometimes get upset about same-sex marriage is going to destroy families. Heterosexual divorce has done more to destroy families and more to destroy society than same-sex marriage ever has. That is the reality. So we need to be preaching to ourselves first.
Yes.
Next slide. The state claims a compelling interest in marriage, and actually it does have a compelling interest in marriage. Every marriage should be presumed valid. What it says is that the purpose of marriage for the state is to promote the public health and welfare. Marriage is not just between two people. Your marriage has impact on society. Somebody, I think it was Melissa, was talking earlier about, or somebody who was talking earlier about if you're brought up in a single parent household, you as taxpayers pay. You come into the church, what do you have? You have broken people. Well, it's not going to affect me, but you know what? One of your children may marry a child of divorce. And if you think that won't affect him or her, you're probably mistaken about that. Marriage is supposed to provide for the public health and welfare. It's supposed to help provide for necessary records, for inheritance purposes, medical records, things like that. It's supposed to provide stability for adults entering into the marriage relationship. You enter into a marriage relationship, most people as believers, and you think, hey, Jesus Christ teaches the permanence of marriage. The Bible teaches the permanence of marriage. If we're believers, we are doing this out of obedience to God, and yet the way that it is right now, for any reason, for no reason, somebody can make up a reason, your marriage can be over. Just like that. And depending upon the state, it could be almost immediately, it could be as few as 60 days, and there's no defense. And I'll get to that in just a moment. Marriage is also supposed to provide for the stability of the children. We have this ideology that we believe, well, children are resilient. Children will be happy if their parents are happy. If parents get divorced, children will be happy if they find out that their parents are happy. We have changed the burden from the parents to learn to love each other, to commit together for their children, and we put that upon children. Children's shoulders aren't big enough and strong enough to hold that burden up. So the purpose of marriage, the state understands that one of the reasons of marriage is to help to provide for the stability of children as well. And the policy of the state is to preserve and uphold each marriage. And next slide, I'll go through these ones really quickly here. So in our Texas Family Code, we have different formalities. We have to, you have to have a marriage license, you can't have forbidden marriages, proof of identity and age, proper execution of the application. A court can be guilty of a misdemeanor if they don't follow certain procedures. Next slide. You have to get married before the license expires. There must be a 72-hour waiting period. There's an exemption, I think, here for military people, but various formalities. Now, next slide. We also acknowledge informal marriages, but even informal marriages require formalities. Next slide. In our Texas Family Code, it tells people that you have a duty to support your spouse if you're married. This is a duty to support your spouse. And too often that's looked at as just being, well, you need to provide financially for your spouse. But I believe that the duty to support encompasses a whole lot more. When you get married, a man and a woman come together, it's because there's differences between the two of them. Your wife can compliment you in areas that you don't see that you're weak. You can compliment your wife. We have stereotypes about men and women, women being more tender, men being more protective, and those can go on a spectrum or whatever. But we do understand that there is the complementarianism there, and that we have a duty to support each other. So one of the things that I mentioned this because in Texas, the statute for no-fault divorce is called insupportability. And I've always wondered if you allege insupportability, is there a violation going on here? Because you have a duty to support. If your wife alleges that you're being insupportive or whatever, or vice versa, insupportability, nobody knows what it means. It's a nonsense word that they use out there. As Melissa talked about the best interest of the child, what's the definition of best interest of the child? Nobody knows. What's the interest of insupportability? I've asked these people, can you tell me what insupportability means? And they're like, no. And then I said, well, can you tell me this? And they're like, is this a trick question? I mean, are you putting me on the spot? So we have statutes that have no meaning to them. This is absolutely ridiculous, but we do have a duty to support each other. And again, if you look at the purpose of marriage, is being not just for the individuals, but as a public good. Strong marriages create strong societies. Strong societies create strong communities, strong states, and I will also say too, strong churches. If you have a nation of, if you have a church of broken families, you're probably going to have a much weaker church than a church of strong, intact families. Next slide. So my thesis here, and I'll get right back to the point in just a moment here, is that the state, if the state's going to regulate marriage, so they say, the state has a duty to protect the marital relationship. And yet, as I said at the very beginning, I'm talking about unilateral no-fault divorce. What is unilateral no-fault divorce? Well, no-fault divorce, honestly, it's a marketing term. It's putting lipstick on a pig. Oh, there was no fault here, we just couldn't get along. Everybody knows that's a lie. You know, you never find as much blame placing as when you have a no-fault divorce. But unilateral means that one person gets to say, I want out for any reason, for no reason. They can make up a reason. I want out because I met Mr. Moneybags who likes me and he has more money than you. I want out because I met Mrs. Young over here and she doesn't have stretch marks and she thrills me and she caters to my needs. So now my marriage has become insupportable. Insupportability is a lie, it's a nonsense doctrine. But the state should be supporting marriage, it's regulating marriage, it has a duty to support, it's not exercising its duty to support with insupportability. Next slide. The state has a compelling interest in marriage. I do not believe that the state has a very strong, compelling interest in divorce. Divorce destroys families. Divorce destroys children. Divorce is transgenerational. Tell two people that are getting divorced, you know what, your divorce is going to affect your grandchildren. What do you think about that? We have taken divorce so cavalierly right now, and our states are all on board with this stuff. We must go back to helping to preserve marriages. Divorce in itself is contrary to the public policy of the state. It destroys marriage, it destroys families, it also weakens societies. Next slide. And that's why the traditional view of divorce used to be that it was hard to get out of a marriage. You had to have some type of fault. Because marriage permanence was that important to society. Well then, and as Melissa talked about, a few other people have talked about, you have attorneys that get together, and this is a big problem, it's a little aside here, but when you have attorneys that are the governor, that are the legislators, that are the judges, I don't know that we're really having a lot of separation of powers there. And we have attorneys in one of our committees back in Texas. Two of them are divorce attorneys. One of them owns a law firm that handles divorce. And they're making legislation. They're going to pass or veto legislation regarding the families. My question is, are they using their public office to enrich their pockets down the line? Are they intentionally making, well, you know what, if we put it this way, we'll still keep the cash cow churning. And that exactly is what happens. But the traditional view of marriage is that it was supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be hard to get out of. And again, because marriage is a public good. It used to be that a person who wanted to file for divorce had to have a wrong against him or her. I could not go out and say, I'm beating up my wife and therefore I want a divorce. My wife could not go out and say, I'm cheating on my husband, so therefore I want a divorce. The innocent party could use divorce as a remedy. But right now what we have is something different. There's no fault divorce. It is a lie. I could do just those things that I was telling you about. I could beat my wife, she could be running around cheating on me all over the place, and then she says, well, it's no fault divorce. You are lying to the court. It is a umbrage to allow bad behavior. But the big problem is this, is that once you have no fault divorce becomes an automatic, it's going to be automatically executed. So instead of having permanence in marriage, as traditional fault-based reasons did, you now have a very much of an impermanence. You have family instability. You have instability of children. You have children sometimes who are born from these two parents, and by the time everybody's married and divorced and stuff like that, their parents supposedly are parents that never were even around at the beginning. They're the third or the fourth husband or wife. I mean, it's crazy what takes place. And that has an impact on our children, the next generation. Next slide. No-fault divorce creates injustices. First off, it does violate the federal constitution and our state constitution in multiple ways. I've looked at it, I counted at least a dozen. I'm not going to go into them right now, I don't have the time for that. But it violates our constitutional rights in many ways. It violates property rights. It empowers divorce attorneys. No-fault divorce is the cash cow for many attorneys. It's interesting because, as we're talking about, we have no-fault divorce, but now we have to have fault-based parenting. We've got to find out which parent is better. To me, in my mind, if you have no-fault divorce, everything's split 50-50. If it's mutual no-fault divorce, that's the end of the game. You don't have people that keep on hitting you with lawsuits again and again and again to try to say you're the worst parent. It's complete nonsense. There's no legal standards there whatsoever. We actually had an attorney testify in front of the committee one time. She says, even if the judge knows that there's a fault, he really doesn't want to say that there's a fault because he wants to protect the children. Translated, that means the judge will lie because he thinks it's better for the children to be lied to than for the record to be honest. I think that's a shame. Next slide. No-fault divorce, as I said, incentivizes bad behavior. It all states the adults, and this is talking about adultery in particular, from a book that was written quite some time ago by Herbert Jacob. And all states the adulterer has just as much standing to sue for divorce as the innocent party, and evidence of misbehavior may not even be introduced into divorce hearings. Even if an innocent party objects, no barrier exists to that other person getting a divorce. Next slide. Unilateral divorce is divorce on demand. And by the way, this slide is out of order, so I'll go to the next slide as well. What I wanted to say is that unilateral divorce from the 20th century was actually something that came from Bolshevik Russia. Vladimir Lenin did this. Why did he do this? Vladimir Lenin went into Bolshevik Russia. He knew that he had, in order to oppose communism, he had to weaken two institutions, the church and the family. Destroy the family, destroy the society. Weaken the church, and the two most powerful impediments to communism, totalitarianism, are now out of the way. So how did he do this? Through the marriage code and the divorce code. This is insidiously evil, and it's something that we don't think about. Because it used to be that marriage was under the jurisdiction of the church. The church would marry people. And then they would inform the state so that the state could keep the proper records and so on and so forth. Divorce also was handled differently. And the church always went for family integrity. But what happened was with Vladimir Lenin, he took the jurisdiction of marriage from the church and he said it's a civil matter. And that's why I talked so much at the beginning about what is the nature of marriage. Is it religious? Is it civil? Is it a combination of both? If it's religious by nature, why is the state involved in an affair of the church? Why is the state injecting itself into a religious liberty issue? There was one lady back then who said, to clear the family out of the accumulated dust of the ages, we had to give it a good shake-up. And we did. And that's what happened in Bolshevik Russia. And then, as I said earlier, that basically it came down to the place, to get a divorce, all the spouse needed to do was to register with the local Bureau of Statistics, and the spouse would be notified 3 days later. Opposition, the next slide. Opposition to no-fault divorce. Even the communists had a debate about no-fault divorce. We didn't have this in America. Because we're 50 different states, we said state by state, it's a states' right issue. But the opposition to no-fault divorce in Bolshevik Russia was that it would abolish marriage, it would destroy the family, it would legalize polygamy and polyandry. And we don't think about this because, we always think about polygamy and polyandry being at the same time. But we basically have a culture of serial polygamy, serial polyandry. We marry one, divorce one, marry another, divorce. So that's a whole different story there. But and it would ruin the peasants. Divorce actually is prejudicial against people that marriage would help the most, because divorce impoverishes people, and when the poor and those people that lack some of the other benefits go through divorce, it tends to affect them more heavily. Next slide. The goals for the Communist Party was to discredit the family as an institution and encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. This was read into the congressional record back, I believe, in 1963. Next slide. So we come down to the legitimate ends of the marital relationship in the Texas Family Code 6.001. And when it says the legitimate ends of the marital relationship, that's why it is so important to talk about what are the legitimate ends of the marital relationship. Can anybody tell me? Is it to be happy, or is it to glorify God? It's to glorify God. That has a religious nature. And in Texas, we have special protections for religious rights. And this is where, again, the church has really failed, because the church has not realized that what you think marriage is, the state has already said, no, it's not. You think marriage is permanent, the state says, no, it's not. And that's the first encroachment of our religious liberty, and we need to stand up strongly against this. Go ahead, next slide, unilateral divorce. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly here. No-fault divorce is, in Texas anyway, throughout the country, is the 21st century version of Vladimir Lenin's divorce code. How do you like that? We have a communist divorce code. The funny thing was, the communists realized that what they would do was so tragic to their society that they actually changed it. In America, we try to improve it. Maybe we can get better no-fault divorce laws, right? And by the way, California is where it really started here, under President Reagan. President Reagan signed it. He was deceived to. He was lied. He was deceived. He was lied to, and he called it the biggest regret from his public office, is signing no-fault divorce. Yeah. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. Other problems. I'm going to go to other problems with 6.001. Again, nobody knows what insupportable means. It says here at the very first point, the court may grant the divorce. The court always grants a divorce. It's a predetermined outcome. There is no defense, period. The legitimate ends of the marital relationship, they can't define what it is. So they don't know what insupportable is. They don't know what the legitimate ends mean, but they're going to grant divorces. This is plain tyranny.
Yeah.
And don't be surprised when you see tyrannical governments doing what they're doing today. Prevents any reasonable expectation of reconciliation. There's no way that they can say that. I know of people that have been divorced and remarried each other. From what I've heard, about 6 to 8% of the people that go through divorce claiming irreconcilable differences try it again. Maybe the same result, I don't know. But I mean, irreconcilable differences, nobody knows what that means either. Go ahead, skip past the doctrine of vagueness. I've kind of dealt with that. Pleadings only need to use the magic words. When you file for divorce, all you need to do is say that you used to basically just have to say something substantially in the language of the statute. My marriage is irretrievably broken. If you say that, and I have it on videotape. One judge will say, well, is it irretrievably broken? Is it irreconcilable? If you say the magic words, you won your case. The marketing of no-fault divorce, once again, I've said that it was supposed to remedy a certain thing. It really hasn't. Next slide, I'm sorry. Keep going. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that one. Go ahead, keep going. A little bit behind on that there, it looks like. The marketing of no-fault divorce, basically, again, I just said it's taking the, okay, maybe you're one ahead of me. Let me see here. There we go. Right there. Sorry, I didn't realize what's going on here. Okay, here's where we are. And then the next slide after that. As a result, we have judges that do not stop divorces in which marriages are completely redeemable. There was a judge out of Georgia. She said that in her, from what she has seen, at least 40 to 50% of the cases of people appearing before her for divorce, their marriages could have been saved. And this seems to be pretty consistent, that marriages could be saved. And I think that if marriages could be saved, we should make the effort to try to save them, because of all the problems that divorce causes in our society. One judge, Judge O'Leary, said there is considerable evidence that almost half of the divorces could have been averted if someone had stepped in at the right moment and talked sense to the parties. Next slide. Texas Bill of Rights, Article 1, Section 6. No human authority ought in any case whatsoever to control or interfere with the rights of conscience in matters of religion. If marriage is a religious issue, the state has no authority to interfere with that. And the next slide, Go to the slide after that. No fault divorce is an attack on religious liberty. The Waite versus Waite, that one right there. So there are actually several cases. Waite versus Waite in 2001, there was a justice that said no fault divorce should be unconstitutional because it violates the rights of conscience of a religious person. And yet, there's no defense to it whatsoever. Panko v. Panko, that was a case that we had at the Supreme Court earlier this year. The court chose not to hear it, but that was based on a similar pleading. I think if the court heard it, it would have been very plain that the statutes are unconstitutional. Next slide. We've talked about some of these people. What are the implications for religious liberty? I know these people that they were mentioned earlier. The judge orders a father that he cannot teach his children biblical sexuality. Mr. Younger was not allowed to read so much in the Bible because once you start talking about biblical sexuality, you might be influencing the children. And yet a father or a mother should have the right to educate children in their religion. Now the state will allow you to teach LGBTQ, but not biblical sexuality. That is a religious liberty issue. The judge orders a father, you cannot pray with your son. That is a religious liberty issue. A judge tells a father he cannot see his children until he has psychological counseling. And a lot of this was a religious liberty issue based as well. A judge tells another father that you must send your child to a school that teaches the critical race theory.
No, never.
So I'm almost done here. The church's response, this is an attack on the church. The church has largely been silent. We need to actually be motivated. We need to look into this. These issues, we're not just picking one side or the other. We talk about fatherlessness because that tends to happen mostly to fathers. It also happens to mothers. It happens to grandparents. It happens to other people as well. But we need to stand up against this. This is a scandal. Our silence has been a scandal. I would also say too that divorce is a lawsuit. Next slide there. It's a lawsuit. One person is being sued. That goes against our religious principles as well. If you are two believers, you are not to take another believer to court, according to 1 Corinthians. But what's even worse, it's a sham lawsuit because it's a lawsuit that you can never win if you're the respondent. There is a predetermined outcome. You have no due process. Next slide. Okay, again, no proof necessary. There's a predetermined outcome. The next slide there, I do have down some videos that I put out regarding how it violates the U.S. and Texas constitutions. Next slide, Texas Constitution, Article 356.13. This is a special law that has been crafted by the legislature, a special law that gives somebody an advantage. The petitioner always wins. Always. It's guaranteed 100% of the time. There are no exceptions. What do I mean by winning? That person gets a divorce. Any reason, no reason, they can make up a reason. Perjury, we're supposed to stop lying. Perjury is rampant in our family courts. Next slide, divorce, no fault divorce is tyrannical. That expands the power of government. I believe that in the next slide, the results of the state's abrogation and its duties, I believe that the state is engaging in fraud. Because when two people get married, they expect the state to actually support a marriage based on the policy. I believe that the state has betrayed its citizens and the children, and as it also becomes that marriage is now an institution with no legal protection. When one person can break a marriage for any reason, for no reason, you have no legal protection. When a pastor marries people up here, it means nothing to the state. That is no longer a sacrament or a calling of God. We have a disposable marriage, we have a disposable family. Judges have the opportunities to be good, but they tend not to. And the very final slide, unilateral no fault divorce. Why are we silent and submissive? These are my grandchildren. And I haven't seen them now for over 6 years. And why do I fight? Because I do not want to see this evil system left to them. I do not want to have my grandchildren come up to me and go through something like this and say, Grandpa, did you know that they could do this? I said, well, yeah, I did. Grandpa, did you try to stop it? And all I know is that they will know that I have been fighting this thing. I will not let, to the best that I can, this continue to oppress and destroy the upcoming generation. I love my grandchildren, those are. Anyway, thank you. I apologize. I did go a little bit over the allotted time limit, but thank you so much.